I buried my husband that morning, and my dignity an hour later. Let me tell you something about grief, real grief, the kind that hollows you out from the inside. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic sobs or movie-perfect tears. It's quiet. It's the weight of pantyhose you haven't worn in months because David always said they were uncomfortable. It's the mascara you apply twice because your hands won't stop shaking. It's standing in your closet at 6 a.m., staring at a black dress you bought 30 years ago and thinking, this will have to do. Because when you've spent the last 18 months sleeping in hospital chairs, holding your husband's hand through chemo, whispering promises into his unhearing ears at 3 a.m., you don't exactly have time to go shopping for your own widowhood. The funeral chapel smelled like lilies and lies. That's what I remember most. That sickly sweet floral smell they pump into these places to cover up the reality of death, the gray November morning pressing against the windows, the organ playing something that was supposed to be comforting but just sounded empty, and the stairs. God, the stairs. I felt them before I even walked through the door. You know that feeling when you enter a room and the temperature drops? When conversations don't stop exactly but they pause? That's what happened when I stepped into that chapel holding David's folded flag against my chest like a shield. My son Mark was already there, my boy. 6'2" of expensive suit and careful distance, standing next to his wife like they were posing for a magazine spread. Manhattan power couple attends unfortunate family obligation. And Janelle. Oh, Janelle. My daughter-in-law stood there in head-to-toe Chanel, and I know it was Chanel because I've been in this business long enough to spot a label from across a room. Her hair was blown out perfectly, her makeup camera ready, her heels tall enough to make a statement. I don't belong in places like this. I'm just visiting. I was halfway down the aisle when she said it. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Clear enough that there was no mistaking it. My God, Carrie. Did you actually come dressed like that? The organ stopped. I'm not exaggerating. The organist's hands literally froze on the keys. Janelle's voice carried across that chapel like a whip crack. You look like a thrift store mannequin. I mean, I know you're grieving, but... Really? Her friend's 3 carbon copies in their mid-30s, all highlights and Botox, tried to hide their smiles behind their hands. One of them wasn't even subtle about it, she just laughed. A little tinkling laugh that said, "Oh my God, can you believe this old woman?" Someone's phone slowly rose. I saw it in my peripheral vision, filming, recording this moment for whatever group chat would tear me apart later. I stood there. Just stood there, holding my husband's flag, wearing my cheap black dress, feeling every single pair of eyes in that room cataloging my failures as a woman, as a mother-in-law, as someone who should have known better than to show up to her own husband's funeral looking so ordinary. Mom. Mark's voice was barely a whisper. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor, at the pews, at anything but his mother. Standing there being humiliated. Maybe you should. There are seats in the back. In the back. At my own husband's funeral, Janelle leaned into one of her friends, whispering just loud enough. I told Mark we should have offered to take her shopping. This is just embarrassing. For everyone. My hands were shaking. The flag was heavier than it should have been, like it was absorbing all the weight of this moment, all the shame, all the eyes, all the phones pointed at me like weapons. And I thought about David. My David, who proposed to me in a coffee shop on 47th Street with a ring he'd saved 6 months to buy, who held my hand through 3 miscarriages before Mark finally came, who stayed up with me through every late night, every deadline, every moment of doubt when I thought I'd never make it in this city, in this industry, in this brutal, beautiful world that eats women like me for breakfast. David, who knew every secret I'd ever kept. Including this one. I looked down at my dress. This cheap black dress that Janelle was so horrified by. This thrift store disaster that was apparently too embarrassing for public viewing. It was mine. I designed it. 30 years ago, in my first studio apartment in Soho, on a sewing machine that cost more than my rent. It was the first piece I ever made under my real name, the name I stopped using when David got sick, when his insurance wouldn't cover experimental treatments, when I had to disappear from the world I'd built to save the man I loved. This dress was part of a limited collection, 12 pieces, haute couture. It sold at auction last year for $60,000. And Janelle, my daughter-in-law, who'd never worked a day in her life, who married my son for his trust fund and his last name, who thought fashion meant whatever was trending on Instagram that week, had no idea she was staring at the work of the woman she'd spent 5 years trying to erase. My fingers tightened around my purse. Inside, a key. Not to my rent-controlled studio in Queens where Mark thought I lived. To something else. Something bigger. Something that would make Janelle's Chanel suit look like a Halloween costume. I lifted my head, met her eyes, and smiled. "You're right," I said quietly. "I should have worn something more appropriate." I walked to my seat front row, because that's where widows sit. Janelle and I placed David's flag on my lap. The organ started again. And in that moment, with everyone still staring, still judging, still recording, I made a decision. They wanted to see who I really was? Fine. Let the funeral end first. Then I'd show them exactly who they'd been underestimating. You know what I remember most about the early days? The sound of David's sewing machine at 2 a.m. That rhythmic hum, tick, 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 coming from our tiny studio on Broome Street. I'd wake up, pad across the cold floor in my socks, and find him hunched over some impossible hem, his reading glasses sliding down his nose, a cold cup of coffee forgotten by his elbow. "Come to bed," I'd whisper. "One more seam," he'd say. Always one more seam. We were nobody then. 2 kids from nowhere, me from a dying textile town in Pennsylvania, him from a family of tailors in Brooklyn who thought he was crazy for wanting to do something new. We met at a fabric wholesaler on 39th Street. I was buying muslin for practice patterns. He was buying wool for his father's shop. He held the door for me. I was carrying too many bolts. One fell. We both bent down to pick it up, and our hands touched, and God, I know how that sounds, like a movie, like something that couldn't possibly be real. But it was. We got married 6 months later in City Hall. His family didn't come. Mine couldn't afford to. The witness was a clerk who'd seen us waiting in line and took pity on us. Our wedding gift to each other was a used industrial sewing machine and a lease on 200 square feet in Soho that smelled like mold and old coffee. And we built everything from there. Everything. David would cut. I would design. He'd handle the tailoring clients, lawyers, bankers, men who needed custom suits and were willing to pay for quality. I'd work on my own pieces at night, after the client work was done. Dresses, coats, things I dreamed about in colors that didn't exist yet. We didn't sleep much in those years. We couldn't afford to. When Mark came our miracle baby, after so many losses I'd stopped counting, I sewed between feedings. I designed with a baby strapped to my chest. David would finish client orders while I nursed, and then we'd switch, and he'd walk Mark around the studio singing old Italian songs his grandfather taught him while I finished hemlines by hand. Every birthday, I made Mark something special. A little suit, a jacket, a vest with his initials embroidered inside where only he would see them. When he was 7, he said, "Mom, you don't have to try so hard. The other kids just get toys." I remember looking at him, this beautiful boy with David's eyes and my stubborn chin, and thinking, you have no idea what I'd give to make sure you never have to try this hard. So I smiled and said, "But I like making things for you." And I did. God help me, I did. By the time Mark was in high school, we'd moved beyond custom tailoring. We had a label. Small, exclusive, whispered about in the right circles. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. And then the offer came. A luxury fashion house, one of the old European names, wanted to acquire our designs, our patterns, our entire archive. They wanted David's tailoring techniques. They wanted my aesthetic. But they wanted it quietly. Anonymous ownership, silent partnership. Our names would disappear from the labels. We'd become ghosts in our own creation. David didn't want to do it. I'll never forget that conversation. We were in our studio, bigger by then, with windows that actually let in light, in a building that didn't leak when it rained. Mark was away at college. It was just us. "We built this," David said. "Why should we hide?" "Because," I told him, taking his hands, those beautiful, scarred hands that had sewn 10,000 perfect seams, "if we don't, Mark will inherit a target. He'll inherit expectations. He'll inherit people who want things from him before they even know his name." I wanted our son to be free. Free to choose his own path. Free to succeed or fail on his own terms. Free from the weight of our world. So we signed, we disappeared. We became silent partners in an empire we'd built stitch by stitch. And we made enough money to make sure Mark would never struggle the way we did. We bought him into opportunities. We paid for his education, his first apartment, his business ventures. We funded his wedding to Janelle, that enormous society affair that cost more than our first 10 years of rent combined. And we never told him where the money came from. David got sick 3 years after Mark's wedding. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The kind that doesn't negotiate. I stepped away from everything. The fashion house, the designs, the work that had been my entire adult life. I became a full-time caregiver. Hospital rooms, treatment schedules, insurance battles. Watching the strongest man I'd ever known become smaller, quieter, more fragile with every passing day. Mark visited, sometimes. Janelle came once. She stood in the doorway of David's hospital room like she was afraid of catching something and said, "This must be so hard for you, Carrie. Let us know if you need anything." They never called again. For 18 months, it was just me and David. Me and the machines. Me and the morphine drips. Me and the late-night hours when he'd wake up confused, asking for his sewing machine, asking if we'd finish that order for the banker on Park Avenue. "We finished it, my love," I'd whisper. "It was perfect. Everything you made was perfect." He died on a Tuesday morning in October. The last thing he said to me was, "Don't let them make you small." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But standing in that funeral chapel, clutching the flag, wearing the dress I'd made 30 years ago when we still believed the world was fair, I understood perfectly. If you've ever given everything to someone who later turned away, you'll understand this part. Thank you to everyone who helps keep these stories alive. Every word you share, every act of kindness helps protect those who still believe in family. I looked at that dress fabric against my lap, and I remembered exactly who I was before I became someone's convenient widow. The reception was held at Mark's townhouse in Tribeca. Of course it was. 3 floors of exposed brick and reclaimed wood, and those floor-to-ceiling windows that make you feel like you're living inside a magazine spread. Caterers in black uniforms. Past hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than David and I spent on groceries in a week back when we were starting out. I stood in the corner by the kitchen, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched, watching people who barely knew David pretend to mourn him. Janelle held court in the living room, her grief performed with the precision of a runway walk, dabbing at dry eyes, accepting condolences like they were compliments. Her friends clustered around her, those same women from the chapel, whispering and nodding with practiced sympathy. I was invisible. That's what I'd become. The embarrassing mother-in-law in the cheap dress, hovering at the edges of her own husband's memorial, too pathetic to even warrant acknowledgement. I needed air. I slipped down the hallway toward the back terrace, and that's when I heard her voice coming from Mark's study. The door was cracked open, maybe 3 inches. Janelle was on her phone. "I'm telling you, Linda, it's going to work," she said. Her voice had that sharp, excited edge she got when she was talking about money. "The lawyer said once we get her evaluated, it's basically a done deal. Mark's an only child. I've already got the assisted living brochures." My hand froze on the doorframe. "Which one are you thinking?" The voice on speakerphone was bright, interested, like they were discussing vacation destinations. "There's this place in Connecticut. It's nice enough, I mean, she won't know the difference. The important thing is getting her apartment." Janelle laughed, a light, careless sound. "It's rent-controlled, Linda. Do you know what that means in Queens? We can flip it for $500,000, easy." Something cold spread through my chest. "And Mark's okay with this?" Linda asked. "Mark will do whatever I tell him to do." Janelle's voice turned dismissive. "He feels guilty, obviously. But I reminded him that she's getting old. She's been acting confused since Daniel died." "David," I whispered. His name was David. "And honestly, it's cruel to let her keep living alone. She can't take care of herself. She showed up to the funeral looking like she bought her dress at Goodwill, for God's sake." "When are you filing?" "Mark signed the preliminary papers yesterday. We just need to get her to the evaluation. The doctor's already on standby, very sympathetic to family concerns, if you know what I mean." I knew exactly what she meant. My legs felt numb. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against the wall. They were going to declare me mentally unfit. They were going to take my home. My son had already signed papers. "Listen," Janelle continued, her voice dropping to something more conspiratorial, "once this is done and I get my promotion at the boutique, we're golden. No more dealing with trashy clients. No more pretending to care about Mark's sad little family drama. We can finally live the life we're supposed to be living." "You still haven't heard back about the promotion?" "It's a formality at this point. The board votes next week. I've been their top seller for 3 quarters running. They'd be idiots not to promote me to senior buyer." She paused. "Although between you and me, I think the only holdup is this one board member who apparently has final approval on all senior positions. Some old money silent partner who never shows up to meetings. But whatever. They'll rubber stamp it." The room tilted. I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to pull me under. The boutique. The promotion. The board member. She had no idea. No idea that the old money silent partner she was dismissing so casually was standing 15 feet away in a 30-year-old dress, listening to her plan to steal everything David and I had built. No idea that I'd sat in on every quarterly board meeting for the past 2 decades virtually, anonymously, but there. Always there. No idea that her promotion required my signature. "I have to go," Janelle said. "People are starting to ask where I am. Can't have them thinking I'm not devastated, right?" She laughed again, that same careless crystalline sound. The call ended. I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, heading back toward the reception, back to her performance, back to accepting sympathy for a loss she'd already monetized. I stood in that hallway for a long time. The sounds of the reception filtered through polite laughter, clinking glasses, the low murmur of people who'd already moved on from grief to gossip. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I recognized immediately. Gerald. My financial advisor. The only person outside of David who knew the full scope of what we'd built. "We need to talk about Janelle. Urgent." I stared at those words. And something inside me, something that had been bending and bending under the weight of grief and humiliation and disbelief, finally stopped bending. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their betrayal made you question your own worth, you're not alone. Thank you to everyone who helps me tell these stories. Your support keeps this space alive for those who still believe that truth, somehow, will always find its way. I straightened up, smoothed down my dress, my $60,000 Goodwill dress, and walked back into that reception with my head high. They wanted to see a confused old woman? Fine. Let them look. While I decided exactly how much it was going to cost them, the apartment was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum 3 rooms away. I sat on the couch still wearing the dress, the funeral dress. The $60,000 piece of my history that Janelle had turned into a punchline. I hadn't taken it off. Hadn't showered. Hadn't eaten. The sun had set hours ago and I hadn't bothered turning on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate. Outside my window, Queens hummed with its usual symphony car horns, distant sirens, the rattle of the 7 train passing overhead, life continuing like nothing had changed. Like my world hadn't just revealed itself to be built on sand. I kept replaying it. Janelle's voice on that phone call, cold, calculating, clinical. Once we get her evaluated, it's basically a done deal. My son's signature. Already on paper. Already agreeing that his mother, the woman who'd sewn his baby clothes by hand, who'd stayed up 3 nights straight when he had pneumonia at age 6, who'd paid for everything he'd ever wanted without asking for gratitude, was mentally unfit. I tried calling him earlier. 3 times. Each time it rang. And rang. And went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Mark. Leave a message." I didn't. What would I even say? My phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark, silent. Nobody called, nobody checked in. Nobody wondered if the grieving widow might need company on the night of her husband's funeral. I was an inconvenience now, a problem to be solved. I picked up my phone with numb fingers and opened Instagram, a mistake I knew immediately, but I did it anyway. The video was already there. Someone had posted it. A guest at the funeral. Maybe one of Janelle's friends. The caption read, "When you show up to a funeral looking like you raided a costume shop." The video showed me walking down the aisle. Frozen. Clutching David's flag. The audio caught Janelle's voice perfectly. "You look like a thrift store mannequin." 2,000 views. 300 comments. I scrolled through them even though every instinct told me not to. So disrespectful to show up like that. Attention-seeking at her own husband's funeral. Tragic. The son must be mortified. Someone should have told her to stay home. I set the phone down carefully, like it might shatter. My hands were shaking again. The apartment pressed in around me. These walls that David and I had never really lived in, not the way we'd lived in our real home, the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that we'd bought under a trust, that Mark didn't know existed. This place was always just camouflage, a story we told to keep our son from knowing too much too soon. And now it was going to be sold out from under me by the child I'd tried to protect. I looked at the photos on the mantel. Mark at 5, missing his front teeth, holding up a Valentine's card he'd made me in kindergarten. Mark at 12, gangly and awkward, standing between me and David at his middle school graduation. Mark at 23, MBA in hand, smiling like the world owed him everything he'd ever wanted. When did he stop being mine? When did I become disposable? I tried his number again. This time it didn't even ring, just went straight to voicemail. He'd blocked me. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood up slowly, my joints stiff from sitting too long, and walked to David's portrait on the wall. The last professional photo we'd taken together, maybe 15 years ago, back when he was still healthy, still himself. I didn't deserve this, I whispered to his frozen smile. Did I? He didn't answer. The apartment echoed with my own voice. If you've ever sat in a room so quiet it started to echo your thoughts, you'll understand this silence. Thank you to those who help keep these stories alive. Your kindness helps give voice to people who've been forgotten, who sit alone in their pain, waiting to be seen again. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, touching surfaces, straightening things that didn't need straightening. The kitchen counter, the bookshelf, the stack of mail I hadn't opened in weeks. And then I saw it. David's wooden box. It sat on the top shelf of the hall closet, exactly where he'd left it. Mahogany, hand-carved, with brass hinges that had tarnished over the years. We'd bought it together at an antique shop in the village 40 years ago. I pulled it down carefully, cradling its weight. Inside was everything. The incorporation documents for our original company, the acquisition agreement with the fashion house, the trust documents that held our real assets, the Brooklyn brownstone, the investment portfolio, the silent ownership stakes in 3 major retail brands. And at the very bottom, in David's careful handwriting on a piece of aged stationery, "Don't let them make you small." I traced those words with my finger. Outside, the city kept moving. The 7 train rattled past. A siren wailed somewhere toward Manhattan. Someone laughed on the street below. I closed the box slowly. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than pain. Not anger yet, not kite. But something quieter, colder, something that knew how to wait. Gerald's office was in Midtown, tucked above a Korean restaurant on 32nd Street, the kind of place you'd walk past 1,000 times without noticing, which was exactly the point. I climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken had been for years, Gerald said, and he preferred it that way, kept out the curious. He was waiting when I pushed through the frosted glass door. "Carrie." He stood, came around his desk. For a moment I thought he might hug me, but he just gripped my hands briefly. His face was grave. "I'm sorry about David, truly." "Thank you. Sit, please." The office smelled like old paper and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Files were stacked everywhere, organized chaos that only Gerald understood. He'd been our advisor for 23 years. The only person outside our marriage who knew the full scope of what we'd built. He sat across from me, hands folded on the desk. "Tell me what you know," I said quietly. Gerald reached for a manila folder, opened it carefully, like it contained evidence in a murder trial. "Maybe it did. Your daughter-in-law and your son are $93,000 in debt," he said without preamble. "Credit cards, personal loans, a second mortgage on the townhouse they can't afford. They've been borrowing against Mark's trust fund for 2 years. My stomach dropped. Janelle's spending habits are aggressive. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, memberships to clubs they can't afford. Mark's business venture, the tech startup, failed 8 months ago. He hasn't told you." "No," I whispered. "He hasn't." Gerald pushed a paper across the desk. Bank statements. Credit reports. Numbers that made my vision blur. "They need cash, fast. Your rent-controlled apartment in Queens could sell for $500,000, maybe more. That would clear their debt and give them breathing room." He paused. "That's why they're pursuing a conservatorship." The word hung in the air like poison. "They already have a doctor lined up," Gerald continued. "Someone willing to testify that you're mentally incompetent. Mark signed preliminary papers 3 days ago." 3 days before David's funeral. While I was sitting in a hospital room, holding my dying husband's hand, my son was signing documents to have me declared insane. There's more. Gerald pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. This is from the boutique where Janelle works. Security footage. He turned the phone toward me. The video showed Janelle behind a counter, talking to another employee. Sound was off, but I could read her lips clearly enough. These people have no taste. I don't know why we let them in here. Another clip. Janelle on her phone during work hours, laughing, ignoring customers. Another. Janelle, taking a long lunch, 3 hours, leaving the floor unstaffed. Gerald swiped to another video. This one had audio. Janelle's voice came through tinny but clear. Carrie? Oh my God, Mark's mother? She's so embarrassing. Shows up to family dinners in clothes from like 1,987. I told Mark we need to cut her off before she ruins our reputation. Her friends laughed. She thinks she's so artistic. Please, she's a nobody who married a tailor. I watched myself through Janelle's eyes. A joke. An obstacle. A source of money. And nothing more. Gerald turned off the phone. She's been written up 4 times for conduct violations. The boutique has been building a file. They're waiting to see if she improves before they make a decision about her promotion. The promotion that requires board approval, I said softly. Yes. We sat in silence. If you've ever found truth in the quiet moments after pain, you know what this part feels like. Thank you to everyone who supports these stories. Your kindness keeps hope alive for people still finding their voice after betrayal. What do you want to do? Gerald asked finally. We could pursue legal action. Fraud, elder abuse, attempted theft. No. He looked at me, surprised. I met his eyes steadily. No lawyers, no retaliation. I paused, feeling something cold and clear settle in my chest. I want the truth to speak for itself. Gerald studied my face for a long moment. Then he pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the desk. Sign here, he said quietly. But Carrie, once this starts, there's no reversing it. I picked up the pen and signed my name in the same hand that had sketched 1,000 designs, sewn 1,000 seams, built an empire no one knew existed. The same hand that was about to dismantle my daughter-in-law's entire world. Without raising my voice once, there comes a point when silence stops meaning defeat. It becomes preparation. I sat in my apartment the morning after meeting Gerald, watching the light filter through the curtains in thin golden lines. The coffee in my cup had gone cold an hour ago. I hadn't touched it. Hadn't needed to. My phone sat on the table, screen dark. 17 missed calls from Mark, 12 texts from Janelle. I didn't read them. For years, I mistook generosity for love. Now, I'm learning the quiet math of self-respect. The first move was the simplest. I called the bank and closed the account. Mark had access to the one I'd opened years ago, so he could help manage my finances when David got sick. The representative asked if I was sure. Completely, I said. Each keystroke on her end felt like a knife cutting through chains. Next, I contacted the property management company for my apartment, changed the locks, updated the emergency contact from Mark to Gerald. When the super asked why, I just smiled and said, spring cleaning. He didn't need to know I was building a fortress. Then I went shopping. The boutique was in Soho, all white marble and brushed gold fixtures. The kind of place that made you feel underdressed the moment you walked in, which was exactly the point. I wore my oldest coat, sensible shoes, carried my worn purse. I looked exactly like what Janelle thought I was, a poor widow with no taste. She saw me immediately. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then that familiar contempt poorly disguised as concern. Carrie? She approached carefully, like I might be contagious. What are you doing here? Shopping, I said simply. I thought, maybe you could help me. You always look so elegant. Her eyes lit up. This was her element, her stage. Oh, honey. She put a hand on my arm, steering me toward the clearance rack in the back. Let me show you what real elegance looks like. Not whatever you're wearing. I smiled softly. Teach me. I'm here to learn. For the next 20 minutes, Janelle performed. Held up dresses I'd designed 30 years ago, explaining their structure and silhouette with the confidence of someone who'd learned fashion from Instagram captions. She corrected my posture, suggested I invest in better foundations, told me that at my age, I should avoid anything too attention-seeking. "You have to dress for your life, not the life you wish you had," she said, holding up a black shift dress. "Simple, appropriate, forgettable." I nodded along, asked questions, let her feel superior. The security cameras captured everything. I made sure of it. The next morning, I met with Margaret, the boutique's general manager, in a coffee shop 3 blocks away. She didn't know who I was. Not really. She knew I'd requested a meeting about employee conduct concerns. She probably expected a complaint about service. I slid an envelope across the table. "Everything you need is in here," I said quietly. "Employee evaluations, customer complaints, security footage timestamps, performance violations." Margaret opened the envelope, started reading. Her face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" I met her eyes steadily. "Is it accurate?" She looked back down at the papers, flipped through them slowly. Video stills of Janelle on her phone during work hours. Transcripts of customer complaints. Documentation of inventory discrepancies. "Yes," she whispered finally, "it's accurate." "Then I trust you'll handle it appropriately." I stood. "Thank you for your time." I was gone before she could ask my name. Gerald handled the legal paperwork. Mark was removed from my emergency contacts, my bank accounts, my medical proxy. The power of attorney he'd thought was legitimate was quietly revoked. Turns out it was never properly notarized anyway. The assisted living application they'd forged with my supposed signature? Gerald flagged it with Adult Protective Services. Let them explain that to an investigator. Every small action was surgical, precise, irreversible. They taught me that love meant giving. Today, I'm teaching myself that love can also mean stopping. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. I'd attended hundreds of these meetings over the years, always remotely, always anonymously, always from the safety of a phone line where I could vote without being seen. This time, I walked into that conference room in person. Gerald had prepared everyone. The board members knew who I was. They rose when I entered, shock visible on their faces. Some of them had never seen me in person, only knew me as a signature on documents, a voice on speakerphone. I took my seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," I said quietly. The motion was simple. 3 sentences. Terminate Janelle Albry as boutique employee. Effective immediately. Cause: documented violations of conduct policy, customer service failures, and misrepresentation of company values. The vote was unanimous. My phone rang that afternoon. Margaret's number. "Miss Laurent?" Her voice was tight. "She's here." "Janelle. She's demanding to speak to the owner. She's very upset." I looked out my window at the city below. The afternoon sun caught the buildings, turning glass into gold. It's funny how silence can sound like thunder when guilt starts to echo. "Tell her," I said softly, "that the owner is unavailable." "Should I?" "Tell her the decision is final." "And Margaret?" I paused. "Thank you for your integrity." I hung up. For the first time, I didn't need them to hear me. My silence had already spoken. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on Thursday. Margaret's voice was strained, almost apologetic. "Miss Laurent, I'm sorry to bother you, but Janelle is here. She's very insistent. She says she needs to speak with the owner about a terrible misunderstanding." I looked at my reflection in the window of my apartment. The woman staring back at me wasn't the one who'd stood frozen in that funeral chapel. She was someone older, harder, free. "Tell her the owner will see her," I said quietly. "In 15 minutes. I arrived at the boutique through the back entrance, took the private elevator to the executive office on the 3rd floor, the one with my name on documents nobody ever bothered to read. Margaret was waiting in the hallway, wringing her hands. "She's inside," she whispered. "She's been crying. She says this is all a mistake, that someone's trying to sabotage her career." "Thank you, Margaret. Give us 10 minutes, then come back." I opened the door. Janelle was pacing near the window, her designer bag clutched to her chest like a shield. Her makeup was smeared. Her hair, usually perfect, was disheveled. She looked like someone watching their world collapse in real time. She spun around when she heard the door. "Oh, thank God," her voice broke with relief. "I don't know who you are, but please, you have to help me. I'm being unfairly punished. There's been some terrible mistake. I'm one of the best employees here, ask anyone. This is discrimination. Or sabotage. Or... She stopped. Her eyes focused on my face. Recognition hit her like cold water. Carrie? I closed the door behind me. Walked slowly to the chair behind the desk, the executive chair, mahogany and leather, positioned to face the entire room. I sat down. Hello, Janelle. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, then something close to panic. Why are you in here? This is the owner's office. You can't just... I know, I said calmly. It's my office. The silence that followed was absolute. Janelle's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No sound came out. I folded my hands on the desk. The same hands that had sewn her wedding dress, a gift she'd never thanked me for. The same hands she'd mocked for being old and unfashionable. Let me help you understand, I said softly. You mocked the woman who signs your paycheck. You tried to steal my home. You humiliated me at my husband's funeral. I paused. And you mistreated clients at my store. No, Janelle shook her head violently. No, that's not. You don't understand. I have security footage, Janelle, hours of it. I turned the monitor on my desk toward her, pressed play. The first video showed her at the boutique, laughing with coworkers while a customer stood waiting, ignored. The timestamp read 2:34 p.m. On a Tuesday, a day she'd claimed to have worked a full shift. The second showed her on her phone, scrolling through social media while the floor went unstaffed. The third was from just days ago. Her voice came through clearly. You have to dress for your life, not the life you wish you had. Me, standing there in my cheap dress, nodding along, playing the role she'd assigned me. Then I played the funeral video. The chapel. The organ music. Janelle's voice carrying across the room. Did you actually come dressed like that? You look like a thrift store mannequin. The guests staring, the phones rising to record. Me, frozen, holding David's flag. Janelle watched herself on screen, her face drained of color. That dress, I said quietly, was worth $60,000. I designed it 30 years ago. It was part of my first collection under my real name, Caroline Laurent. Janelle's legs seemed to give out. She sank into the chair across from me. The fashion house you thought you were impressing? I continued. I'm a silent partner. I've been for 23 years. The board you were so confident would promote you? I sit on it. The old money partner you complained about on the phone? That was me. I didn't. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know. No, I agreed. You didn't, because I chose to live quietly, to protect my son from the weight of wealth, to let him build his own life. I leaned forward slightly, but you mistook my quietness for weakness, my kindness for stupidity, my grief for an opportunity. Janelle started crying, real tears this time, not performed ones. Please, she choked out, please, I made a mistake. I was under so much stress. Mark's business failed, we have debt, I was scared. So you decided to have me declared mentally incompetent and steal my home? She flinched. Janelle. I kept my voice gentle. Surgical. Your problem isn't fashion. It's your character. A knock at the door. Margaret entered with a security guard. Janelle stood up fast, stumbling. No, you can't do this. Mark will fix this. He'll talk to you. Mark signed papers to take away my rights, I said quietly. While I was caring for his dying father. I don't think he'll be much help to you now. This isn't fair. Her voice rose to a shriek. I worked hard. You deserve exactly what you gave. I picked up the termination papers from my desk, read them once more. Then signed my name Caroline Laurent, in clear, steady script. I looked up at her. This woman who'd married my son for his trust fund, who'd treated me like a burden, who'd tried to erase me. If a stranger had walked in dressed like me, I said, you would have treated her the same way. I just let you reveal yourself. Margaret stepped forward. Miss Albry, please come with me. Janelle looked at me one last time, searching for mercy, maybe, for some sign that this was reversible. I met her eyes steadily, and said nothing. Sometimes silence is the most powerful response of all. Security escorted her out. Her sobs echoed down the hallway, growing fainter, until the door closed and there was only quiet. I sat in that office for a long time after she was gone. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, turning the room gold. And for the first time since David died, I felt like I could breathe. After the verdict, silence became my favorite sound. It was the sound of justice finally breathing. I left the boutique that afternoon through the front entrance. Not hiding, not ashamed. Walking past the mannequins dressed in designs I'd created decades ago, past the sales floor where Janelle had once held court, past the window displays that had made this place profitable. The autumn air was crisp. The city hummed around me, indifferent and eternal. My phone buzzed before I reached the corner. Mark. I let it ring. He called again. And again. On the fourth call, I answered. Mom. His voice was frantic. Mom, what did you do? Janelle just called me, she's hysterical. She said you fired her. She said you, he stopped. She said you own the boutique? Yes. Silence on the other end. Long and terrible. I don't understand, his voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything? I asked quietly. Would you still have signed papers to have me declared incompetent? Would Janelle have treated me differently at your father's funeral? Mom, I can explain. Mark! I stopped walking. Stood on the corner of Spring and Broadway, watching traffic blur past. Meet me at Cafe Dante in 20 minutes. I hung up before he could respond. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I brought something for you, I said finally. Slid a manila folder across the table. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside were copies of the documents he'd signed. The preliminary conservatorship papers, the medical evaluation request, the application to have me moved to assisted living, all bearing his signature. His face went white. I didn't think they'd actually. He couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't think they'd actually what? My voice was gentle, clinical. Didn't think I'd find out? Didn't think there would be consequences? Or didn't think about me at all? Janelle said you were getting confused, that you couldn't take care of yourself, she said. And you believed her. I leaned forward slightly. Mark, I spent 18 months caring for your father, managing his medications, his appointments, his insurance battles. I never missed a dose, never forgot a treatment. Does that sound like someone who's confused? He covered his face with his hands. You were my son before you were her husband, I said quietly. I needed you, and you chose her. I'm sorry, his voice broke. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I know you are, and I meant it. I could see the shame eating him alive, the realization of what he'd done settling into his bones. But sorry doesn't erase what happened. I stood up, left the folder on the table. Wait. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. What happens now? Now? I looked at him, this man who used to be my little boy, who I'd protected from everything, including the truth of who I was. Now you figure out who you want to be. Without my money. Without my help. Just you. I walked out of that cafe and didn't look back. The consequences arrived like dominoes falling. Word spread fast in the fashion world. It always does. Janelle's firing became cocktail party gossip, then industry cautionary tale. The details emerged: the rudeness to clients, the mockery of an elderly woman who turned out to be the owner, the attempted theft of her mother-in-law's home. Nobody wanted to hire someone with that kind of reputation. Her friends, those polished women who'd laughed at my cheap dress, stopped returning her calls, deleted her from group chats, suddenly had no memory of ever being close. That's how it works in certain circles. You're only as valuable as your access. The debts came due. The townhouse in Tribeca? Foreclosed. The lease on Janelle's Range Rover? Repossessed. Mark's trust fund? The one they'd been borrowing against? Frozen pending investigation of potential fraud. I heard through Gerald that they'd moved into a motel in Jersey City, the kind with weekly rates and coin-operated laundry. I didn't need to ruin them. Their lies had already done that. Sometimes I'd see them on social media, Janelle's accounts, once full of carefully curated luxury, now private or deleted. Mark's LinkedIn still listed his failed startup, no updates in months. They used to whisper that I'd lost my mind. Now they avoided their own reflections. I thought about calling Mark sometimes, thought about extending an olive branch, offering help. But then I'd remember the funeral. The dress. The mocking laughter. the coldness in Janelle's voice when she planned to steal my home. And I'd remember David's last words, "Don't let them make you small." So I didn't call. I sold the Queen's apartment, got $700,000 for it, more than Janelle had estimated. Used the money to establish a scholarship fund in David's name for fashion students from working-class backgrounds. Kids like we used to be. I returned to work. Not publicly, not with fanfare, but quietly. Designing again. Creating. The board welcomed me back, with knowing smiles and respectful silence. And some evenings, when the light hit the windows just right, I'd sit in my real home, the Brooklyn brownstone nobody knew about, and feel something close to peace. Some debts don't need to be collected. Life has its own way of balancing the books. After the noise fades, what's left isn't victory. It's understanding. 6 months passed before Mark called again. Not to ask for money, not to make excuses, just to ask if he could see me. "Please, Mom," his voicemail said. "I need to talk to you, the real you." I didn't respond right away. Sat with his request for 3 days, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by water. Finally, I texted him an address. Not the Queen's apartment he thought I lived in. That place had been sold, the proceeds donated to David's scholarship fund. The real address. The Brooklyn Heights brownstone with the garden David had tended, with the windows that caught morning light, with the studio on the 3rd floor where I still designed. The home Mark had never known existed. He arrived on a Saturday morning in November. I watched him from the window as he stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the building, checking the address 3 times on his phone, confusion written across his face. When I opened the door, he looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Mom?" His voice was small, uncertain. "You live here?" "For 32 years, I said quietly. "Come in." I made coffee while he walked through the rooms in silence, touching the furniture like he needed to confirm it was real. Staring at the walls lined with framed sketches, my designs, some of them iconic pieces that had been featured in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, museums. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why didn't you tell me? Why live in that tiny apartment when you had this?" "We wanted you to be free," I said, handing him a cup. "Free to choose your own path. Free from expectations. Free from people who'd only see you as a means to wealth." He sat down heavily on the couch. The same couch where David and I had made so many decisions, planned so many futures. "Janelle," he whispered. "Yes." "She wouldn't have." He stopped. Started again. "She only married me because she thought you had money," I finished gently. "And you did, just not in the way she expected." Mark put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I forgot who you were. I let her make me blind." He looked up at me, eyes red. "At Dad's funeral, when she said those things, I should have defended you. I should have stood up, but I was embarrassed. I was ashamed of you." The words hung between us. "I know," I said. "And the papers I signed. The apartment. The doctors." His voice cracked. "I tried to take away your freedom. Because I wanted your home. What kind of person does that make me?" I sat down beside him, not touching but close enough that he could feel my presence. "It makes you human," I said quietly. "Flawed. Capable of being manipulated. Capable of greed." I paused. "But also capable of change. How can you forgive me?" "Justice isn't about watching people fall, Mark. It's about standing again, without hate." I meant it. The anger that had burned so hot in those first weeks had cooled into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. And with understanding came the possibility of peace. "I want to make it right," he said desperately. "Tell me how, please." "You can't make it right." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "You can only do better going forward. But Mark, hear me clearly. Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation. Without it, we have nothing." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I left Janelle," he said after a long silence. 2 months ago. Signed the divorce papers last week." "I know." "How?" "Gerald keeps me informed." I smiled slightly. "I'm not invisible anymore, remember?" We sat together as the morning light moved across the floor. The city hummed beyond the windows, distant sirens, car horns, the eternal symphony of New York surviving another day. "Can I visit again?" Mark asked finally. "Not to ask for anything, just to know you, the real you." I thought about it. Thought about David, about everything we'd built and protected and sacrificed, about the boy Mark had been and the man he was trying to become. Yes, I said, but slowly. Trust is rebuilt in inches, not miles. He left an hour later. I watched him walk down the street, hands in his pockets, shoulders a little straighter than when he'd arrived. After he was gone, I climbed the stairs to the studio, stood at the window overlooking the garden, where late autumn roses still clung to life, where David's spirit still felt close. Justice came. Daniel, I whispered to the glass, to the light, to the memory of the man who'd known me better than anyone, quietly, beautifully. I used to believe love meant giving everything. Now I know love also means knowing when to stop. Not stopping love itself, but stopping the patterns that drain it. Stopping the people who mistake kindness for weakness. Stopping the belief that sacrifice equals devotion. People show their true selves when they believe you are powerless, when they think you can give them nothing. That day at the funeral, Janelle showed me exactly who she was. And I simply let the truth finish the job. If my story teaches anything, it's this: kindness without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. I turned from the window, walked to my drafting table, picked up a pencil and a fresh sheet of paper, and started to design. Not for clients, not for profit. Just for the pure joy of creation, the thing David and I had loved most, the thing that had built everything, the thing no one could ever take away. Outside, the city continued. Inside, I was finally home. Justice gave me back my name. But peace gave me back myself. If you've ever lost yourself trying to love someone who only saw your worth in numbers, I hope my story reminds you, it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for keeping these stories alive, stories where justice doesn't shout, it heals.